Hello. Welcome to the Millennium Cohort Study webinar. Today we're particularly focusing on features of the age 14 MCS 6 week, the time use diary and the accelerometer. My name is Vanessa Moulton. I'm a research associate at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, and I'm going to give a brief introduction before I hand you over to my colleagues. You can't see us, as you can see, but hopefully have the slides in front of you. If you want to ask questions, please send them to us via the chat section while we're going through, and we'll try and answer them at the end of each session. So there are 4 sessions today. For the first 3 sessions, there'll be a presentation followed by questions and answers related to that particular session. And we'll finish with a general Q&A session at the end. As you see, they're all timed, and we're going to try and keep to those timings. So you can log in and out of the sessions that are appropriate for you. If we don't complete the questions in the allotted time, we'll roll them over to the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Or if we finish before the time, we'll break until the start of the next session. So now I'm going to cover a bit of background and discuss how to download MCS data. When I finished, today it's not Emla Gilbert, but Emla Fitzsimons will be discussing the next, running through the collection and content of the activity monitors and time use diaries. And at 2:35, Vilma, our data manager, will discuss the structure and format of the activity monitor and time use diary. And I'll be back at 3 o'clock to give a very brief update on MCS 7, followed by general Q&A. And we'll finish definitely by 3:30. So just to give you a bit of context, here's an overview of the MCS content up to MCS 6, that's sweep 6. If you want more detail, Josh and Fitzsimons study profile is a good reference, and I've given you the reference for that below. We've now completed 6 weeks from age 9 months to age 14. The resident parents have completed questionnaires at each sweep, and the cohort have been measured and assessed from age 3. Since they were 7, they've also been taking part in self-completion questionnaires. At age 14, we also asked them to wear an activity monitor, which they also did at age 7, and in addition, keep a time use record. We also collected saliva for DNA extraction, which I'll briefly explain. So this is the other major element of the age 14 survey, and we're very excited about the saliva samples. And they've been collected from the cohort members and biological parents if they were resident. And we believe it's the first time that a triad of DNA samples has been collected from 2 biological parents and child in a large scale study. We've got approximately 23,500 samples which have been collected, over 9,000 from the cohort member, 9,000 from the main parent, and just under 5,000 from the second parent. The University of Bristol have been working on storing the samples and extracting the DNA. And the DNA extractions will be genotyped to allow for analysis of different genes. The genotyping is underway, and access is expected in autumn 2018 via a special access committee. So that will be one of the next data deposits. So over the last year or so, we've been putting together initial findings from the age 14 survey. They cover a range of subjects: mental health, obesity, risky behaviours, aspirations and cognition. And some of the headline results have received press attention. You may have seen them around over the last year. For example, 24% of girls in the MCS at age 14 reported experiencing high levels of depressive symptoms. There were also much press around the obesity and also risky behaviours. By the time they were 14, around 5 in 10 UK teenagers experimented with alcohol, smoking or drugs in some way. If you want to find out more about the findings, those can be found on the link above, and some have also, we've now got some peer-reviewed journals as well as a result of those findings. So if you want to access the data, for those of you who don't know and haven't done so already, you can register at the UK data service. You can also go on here and browse for what's available. You need to create an account. You need to state the purpose of the project. find the data sets of interest and agree to data security and other policies. And then you can download the data, including the data we're going to be talking about today, and related supporting documents in either SPSS or Stata. Also, as well as the UK Data Service having a vast amount of documentation for the MCS, you can also go onto the CLS website at that link there that I've given you. On there are questionnaires, technical reports and user guides. As I mentioned, the guides to the initial findings, not just for MCS 6, but for previous suites, and all the latest and previously published work and research findings using the Millennium Cohort Study. So I'm now going to pass you on to Emla, who's going to talk about the content of the Time Use Diary and the Accelerometer.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Emla Fitzsimons. I'm the Principal Investigator of the Millennium Cohort Study, and I'm going to talk about the design and the implementation of the Time Use Diaries and Accelerometers at age 14. And then in the next presentation, my colleague Vilma will talk about the specifics of the data deposit that we've recently done. So let me get started. Okay, so this is just a brief overview. So I'll talk about the design of the Time Use Diaries, give you an overview of the accelerometers and what we did at 14. I'll talk a little bit about how we actually implemented them out on the field, and briefly talk about the response rates that we obtained. So this is very highly innovative data that we've collected at 14, and we're very, very excited about having just deposited it and hoping that, you know, this webinar will give you the tools to help you analyze it and download it and so on. So we think there's lots and lots of interesting research questions you can look at using the data. It's very, very rich data. The age 14 survey on MCS is the first large-scale population study in the world to incorporate both objective measures of physical activity and sedentary behaviour alongside self-reported time use diary covering the exact same period. So it was a paired activity with each type of data enhancing the other to some extent. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. So first, let me talk about the time use diaries. So the diaries are pre-coded light diaries where respondents had 44 activity codes that they could select from. And I'll show you some of those in a little while. And these codes were developed to be relevant to 14-year-olds. And as well as reporting the main activity that cohort members were engaged in at a particular time of the day, they also reported on the location, who they were with, and how much they enjoyed that activity. We used a mixed mode design, so we had a bespoke app for mobile phones and an online diary, which were developed especially for the survey at age 14. And we also had a traditional paper diary available for cohort members who were unable or didn't want to complete the diary in electronic format. So just to give you the high-level categories that were included as part of the time use diary. So as mentioned, there were 45 codes in total, and they were grouped into these 12 high-level categories that you can see there on your screen. So I'll just give you a moment to look through those. In terms of the actual instruments, so as mentioned, we had three different modes. So the two main ones were the web and the app, and then the paper diary could be used for people who, as a backup option really, who didn't want to or who couldn't use the other two. So the web diary was very similar to a traditional paper diary. I'll show it to you in a moment, but it was a grid format, and there was a slot for each 10-minute chunk of the day. And cohort members had to assign each 10-minute slot an activity, so whatever activity they were engaged in from a pre-assigned list. The app, on the other hand, took a more question-based approach, and cohort members didn't have pre-coded 10-minute slots, but they had to assign a start and end date for their activities. And again, I'll show you a visual example of how this worked in a short while. In terms of the diary dimensions, so in both the web and the paper diaries, the different dimensions, so the activity, the location, who they were with, and their enjoyment, could overlap one another. But for the app, the dimensions were coterminous. So in other words, if they reported being at school or doing homework at a particular time, then the location had to correspond exactly to that slot, as did who they were with and the enjoyment of that activity. It couldn't overlap with another activity that came before or after. In terms of the soft and hard checks, so the two electronic formats contained both soft and hard checks, and this was in order to improve data quality. And these checks prevented, for instance, cohort members coding more than one activity for any given time. It also prompted them to check any unlikely entries. So, for instance, 3 or more hours doing one activity continuously other than sleep or school, and so on. And in terms of aid memoirs, for the electronic instruments, so for the app and the web, they were provided with an aid memoir in the form of a notebook, which cohort members could use to jot down what they were doing at times if they were unable to immediately access the web or the app at that point. And then they could use that later on to help them fill it in online or on the app. So just to give you some visualizations of what they look like, I've sort of spoken through this, but I think it's more helpful often to just see what it looked like. So this is the web, an example of one of the activities, so sleep and personal care. And as you can see, the 10-minute slots I mentioned are listed at the top, going across in the top rows. So at 4 a.m. and 10 minutes, they put a blue bar if they were sleeping, and then they dragged the cursor through to 6:30 a.m. When they woke up, and then started personal care at 6:30 through to 8 a.m., where that included shower, bath, getting dressed, and so on. And then at the very bottom of the web were the different, the area where they would put in who they were with, how they enjoyed it, and how much they enjoyed it, and the location they were in. And so the black bar that you can see across the top of this screen here, that shows the respondent which time slots they have actually filled in. So it's a progress bar, and once that was fully running through the entire web, the respondent knew that they had filled in, and there were no gaps in the web diary. So, and this is the app. So using the same example, so first of all, they were asked what they were doing at 4 a.m. Sleep and personal care is what's highlighted, and then that was routed into the different options under sleep and personal care. So for instance, they would highlight sleeping and resting, and then there was a bar to enter what time they finished that activity at. And then when it came to the next activity, the time would automatically start at the time at which the other one had finished just before. So that's how the app worked. I'm sure that looks familiar. That's sort of filling into many of you. And then the paper one, which was the backup option, looked like this, where it was very similar in some ways to the web. It just didn't have any of the soft or hard checks because it couldn't, because they were filling this in on paper, pen and paper. But again, the exact same codes, and then they would just sort of mark in with the pen horizontal bars showing the activities they were in and the start and end times. In terms of the actual protocol around completion, regular completion was encouraged. So for instance, cohort members were encouraged, if at all possible, to complete the app in real time. They could access the online version as and when they needed it, and save and close it, and then just go back to where they left off. As mentioned, an aid memoir was provided in case they couldn't access the app or online straight away. And they were also, many of the cohort members were filling these in during school days, so they were encouraged not to complete the time use record in classes, but they were provided with a letter for their school to explain what they were participating in. So they could fill things in between classes, or if there was a slot during the school day, just to try to maximize data quality as much as possible and really try to get real-time data. In terms of the compliance and returns, so 89% of those eligible for the activity, and I'll talk about that in a few moments, agreed to complete it. Of those, 53% completed the diary on day 1 and 45% completed it on day 2. And the numbers corresponding to those percentages are just under 5,000 for day 1 and around 4,200 cohort members for day 2. In terms of the choice of mode, so again, amongst those placed, 29% chose to do it online. The vast majority, 64%, chose to do it on an app, and a smaller proportion, 7%, chose the paper version. So that's everything for now on time use diaries. I'll come back to it after accelerometers in terms of the implementation in the field. But let me turn now to talk about the accelerometers at age 14. So we decided to use a wrist-worn device from the outset, and that was due to evidence of greater compliance with these types of devices, particularly amongst this age range. In advance of the main survey, we extensively piloted 2 different devices, a Genie-Active Original and the Actigraph GT3X Plus. And we decided to go for the Genie-Active to collect the data at the main stage on the basis that it performed better in the pilots that we carried out in advance and was more acceptable to cohort members of this age. So that's what it looked like. It measures movement on 3 axes and provides a measure of time spent in light, moderate, and vigorous physical activity. It's a wrist-worn device, so it's worn on the non-dominant hand. It's robust and it's waterproof, and it doesn't provide feedback to respondents. So they don't see, they can't see how much activity they did during the day. It's just a blank screen that they see, which is important because then it means they're not adjusting their activity to try to do more or less, depending on what the feedback is. In terms of the wear protocol, so it can be worn whilst bathing, showering, and swimming. Again, that's important so that we can really try to capture all types of physical activity, so they didn't have to take it off when they went swimming. It can also be worn when doing sports. And we provided letters for schools and sports clubs explaining it's safe to wear during sporting activities. So again, we're trying as much as possible to capture physical activity, particularly again at this age when a lot of people are participating in different types of club sports. The only time it has to be removed is when going through airport security. So the data we collected at age 14 complements the accelerometer data that we collected at age 7. Some of you might be familiar with that. So at age 7, cohort members wore a waist-worn accelerometer for 7 consecutive days, and that data are available at UKDA. So in terms of compliance and returns, so amongst those who are eligible to complete this activity, 80% agreed to wear it, and of those 80%, 72% returned the accelerometer. In terms of compliance and the data that we obtained on the return devices, so 16% of those had data for no days, so no data on them. 11% had data just for 1 day, and 63% for 2 days. So in total, we've got data for just under 5,000 cohort members. In terms of the in-field administration, so the devices were placed during the main survey when interviewers went to the home. They were placed at the end of the visit, and the activity was explained to them for 5 or 10 minutes, and they were told what was required. At that point, the interviewer randomly selected 2 24-hour periods, and the day would start at 4 a.m. and finish at 4 a.m. And those 2 days were within 10 days of the interviewer's visit. And one of them was a weekday and one a weekend day. And cohort members basically had to put the device on for the accelerometer the night before that period would start, so that at 4 a.m. it would start recording their sleep. And then they would wear it right through the next day, the following night, and then just take it off the next day. So we'd get that 4 a.m. to 4 a.m. slot. So they wore it for 2 nights in bed. We sent reminders to cohort members and their parents by text message and also by email to put on and to take off the accelerometers as and when the day arrived for them to do so. And we also sent reminders for them to complete their time use diaries. We had a stock of around 4,000 accelerometers, so we didn't have enough to cover all of our cohort members, so they had to be reused and rotated in the field. And so we had to very carefully work out the protocol around this and to make sure that we were really maximising each and every one and getting them back into the field as soon as possible. So cohort members were provided with self-stamped addressed envelopes to post the devices back to the office. Then the data were downloaded, the accelerometers were reset, the batteries were charged. No, sorry, at that point batteries weren't charged. They were reset and then they were posted back out to the interviewers. Once they reached the interviewers, they would charge the batteries, make sure the device was still working well, and then they would send it out to the next person who was eligible for the activity. So we needed to very carefully set up a bespoke device management system to make sure that we could track the status of every device and make sure we were getting them back to the office in good time so that we could send them out and make sure we could collect data for the cohort members. So we didn't have enough accelerometers to cover the entire cohorts, despite the fact that we were rotating them around cohort members and reusing them as much as possible. So for this reason, we drew a subsample who would partake in this activity. And the way we did this was that all cohort members in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland were included as eligible for the activity, and a random sample of 81% of cohort members in England. And that was really the absolute maximum we could do. And we really pushed it as much as we could to get as many as possible in England. But we chose to do all cohort members in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland to get sufficient numbers that would allow for in-country comparisons of activities and time use. And it was because it was a paired activity, they were eligible for both the accelerometer and time use diary, or neither. Just some resources for those of you who'd like to read a little bit more about the implementation and the design further. There's some links there that you can look at a new blog that we've written on the use of new technology to collect data. There's a working paper on the development of the time use diary and also on the implementation of accelerometers, and the links are there. So I'll finish there.
Hello, my name is Vilma Agalioti-Sgompou. I am a research data manager for the Millennium Cohort Study, and today I'm going to talk to you about the accelerometer and time use data, time use diary data that were released from the UKDS recently. So we're going to talk about the structure of the datasets of MCS and specifically the time use diary and the accelerometer data, what they contain, how they look like, and how to handle them and derive variables from them. And we're going to conclude with how to merge these two datasets for research purposes. What is important to mention now is that the majority of the information I cover today exists already in the user guides, which are available through the UKDS, and they are also located in an MRDoc folder that exists in the data that you download from the UKDS. So when you download the data, you have this information there. So the information of the Millennium Cohort Study is formatted has a long format, and this means that there are multiple. This means that there are multiple rows per family. This is because there are multiple respondents per family. So in the Millennium Cohort Study, both parents participate in the survey, and some families have more than one cohort members. There may be twins or triplets. So because of this, the MCS ID is a family household anonymized identifier. The CNAM is the cohort member number within a family, so it can be 2 or 3. And the time use diary and the accelerometer data are structured on a CM level, which means that there is 1 row per child. So you will need MCS ID and CNAM to find information for a child. The underscore CM underscore in the dataset name shows that there is the structure of the dataset. There is 1 row per cohort member. The naming conventions of MCS apply also in the accelerometer and time use diary data. The first letter of the variable name signifies the sweep. It is F for sweep 6. The second letter is for the respondent, and in both the accelerometer and the time use diary data, it's C, because the child, the cohort member response provides us with data. So the accelerometer data set contains information that it has been derived from the accelerometers that the cohort members wore for 2 days, either a weekday or a weekend day. And acceleration is the mean movement that has taken place within a certain period of time. So it's important to understand that the acceleration varies throughout the day because of the strength of it or how frequent it is. And based on that, the variables that are in this data set are based on that. There are different variables based on the strength of movement and the frequency of movement. So let us imagine, for example, a child may be playing basketball, whereas another child may be watching TV. So the acceleration for the child playing basketball is likely to be larger than the acceleration for the child watching TV. And this is the concept of acceleration, and overall, this is the idea behind these data sets. So the first set of variables that is contained in these variables is the general information about acceleration throughout the day. So it's the valid number of hours and the mean acceleration for the day. The second set of variables is the most and least active 5-hour block of the day. This means that you know the mean acceleration for that 5-hour block and what time that 5-hour block starts. Word of caution here is that, for example, imagine that a cohort child goes for running in the morning and in the evening as well. These variables, as most active 5-hour block, will capture only the one active part of the day, and not the other one. So it may capture only the morning and not in the evening. So these variables can be helpful to understand most and least active parts of the day, but they cannot provide you with information across the day on acceleration, which the next set of variables provide you. So the acceleration varies throughout the day, and it may be there may be a lot of acceleration for a small period of time, and not that much for other periods of time. So the epoch is a period a small period that we decide that this will be the acceleration point, the period that we're going to focus on. And imagine that some epochs, for example, of a 5 second, may be more active, as you see in the beginning of the graph, compared to other ones, like at the end of the graph. Whereas if we select 1 minute, or a specific, for example, 1 minute period, that all the epochs are active, this doesn't mean that this will continue. For example, another period of 1 minute, it shows in the lower bits shows that the 5 second epochs are not that active. For this reason, there are the last set of variables help you to select on different criteria of vigorous activity. So vigorous activity is calculated based if there is enough acceleration for at least 80% of that period of time. However, the period of time matters. So, for example, if we set the criterion on 10 minutes of at least 80% of 10 minutes of vigorous activity. In the example of the two children, where the one is watching TV and the other one is playing basketball, the one that is playing basketball is more likely to have acceleration, whereas the one that is watching TV will have no acceleration, because the criterion of 80% for 10 minutes is quite high. However, if we lower the limit at 1 minute, then this variable captures the information. For example, if the cohort member that was watching TV gets up for a bit, this acceleration is captured. So these are different. These variables contain different criteria in acceleration, calculated with different criteria in mind. And overall, the accelerometer dataset contains information on overall acceleration, on the least and most active blocks of the day, and the total time spent in vigorous exercise for different periods of time. The dataset looks like this, which means that we need to have the MCS ID, the family identifier. We need to have the CNAM, which is the cohort member number. And after that, it's important to have the assigned day, because the cohort members wore the accelerometer for 2 days. So the first assigned day, it does not necessarily mean that the first assigned day will be a weekday or the second will be a weekend. It's important to use the variable weekday to determine whether the assigned day was a weekday or a weekend, because they were randomized. So let's see, for example, mean acceleration of, we see that mean acceleration per assigned, whether it, so this is mean acceleration depending on whether it was a weekday or a weekend, and we see that there is variation. And the time use diary has a similar structure to the accelerometer information, because it has an MCS ID, we see that it has a family identifier, it has the CNAM, which is the cohort member number, and then it has the assigned day variable, which is the third variable, and after it contains more information, such as the slot. All the information in the time use diary is provided in a 10-minute slots. So there are 44 different activities that the child could have that the children select from, which can be clustered into 12 general activities. It's important to again remember that the first assigned day is not necessarily a weekday. You need to use the weekday variable, which is similar, which is the same with the accelerometer weekday variable. There may be multiple CM cohort members in the dataset. That's why we need the _CM_. And only 1 day may have been collected for a cohort member, which means that there will be only 144 rows for the child. So let us imagine that the day starts from 4 a.m. and continues, and the cohort member responds in the questionnaire by saying what activity they have been doing. And this will give us a very long data set. It's 144 rows slots per day. This means 144 rows per day, and in total 288 per child if the child responded for both days. This means that the time use diary has more than 1 million rows. It's a really large data set. However, the information is structured in slot and activity and can get easily managed with the syntax that's provided to you in the user guide. It's always important to remember that we need the family identifier, we need the CNAM, the cohort member number within the family, and we also need the assigned day in order to calculate a variable for a specific day and how much time the child spent in a specific day doing something. So in this example, we see how to calculate total number of 10-minute slot activities of a certain activity, and this is physical activity. And the syntax identifies which activities need to be recoded into physical activity, because there are different types of physical activity. And once we calculate that, we calculate a total physical activity per assigned day for that cohort child, and then we keep only one row per assigned day in order not to have duplicate information, and we keep only slot 1, which will give us only one row per assigned day. And here we see, for example, that the information on how much physical activity the child did varies between between weekend and weekdays. The information of the time use diary and the accelerometer can get connected straight away if you keep only one row you can do one-to-many, but it would be better if you reduce the information of the time use diary into derived variables, like I showed you how to derive the information and collapse it together and count how much physical activity the child has provided in the time use diary. So the time use diary is a self-report measure, whereas it gives us information of different activities and how the time was spent, whereas the accelerometer is mean acceleration and different information of acceleration, and it can get connected. The two data sets can get connected directly, taking into account MCS ID, CNAM, and assigned day. The assigned day information from the two data sets is exactly the same. It's the exact same day, I mean. So MCS is getting updated. As you know, MCS 5 and MCS 6 have been provided in a long format, which means one row per respondent, whereas MCS 1 to 4 have been provided in a wide format. This is because the focus used to be mostly on the family in early sweeps rather than a specific cohort child, but from now on the cohort member is the main respondent in the survey and takes more part of the interview. So the data of MCS 1 to 4 will be changed in the near future into long format to match the format of MCS 5 and 6, and in the future MCS 7. This means that the data in a wide format of MCS 1 to 4 will not be available anymore to be downloaded, and they will not be maintained. The structure of the new data sets will be similar to MCS 5 and 6, and it corresponds to the questionnaire. So as you see in the questionnaire, some questions are only direct only to the parents, some questions are directly only to the cohort member. This will go to a CM level dataset, and some questions are directed towards the parents and they are asked to answer about the cohort members, and this will be in a parent CM level dataset. However, it will be possible to find the variable from the previous data to the new data. We will provide you with a list of the correspondence between the previous format and the new format. We will provide you with the data handling guide on how to merge the different files. There will be also a webinar. And you will also receive an email from the UKDS in the email address that you used when you were downloading the data. Thank you very much.
So we're now going to look at a little bit about MCS 7 and give you a very brief update on what's going on with that. So in terms of timeline, the survey is currently in the field, and we started in January 2018, and we're aiming to complete the field work by March 2019. The field work's going very well at the moment, and the response rates are very good, so we're very pleased with that. And the schedule in terms of data deposit at the moment is sometime at the end of 2019. Sometime later this year, we'll be providing copies of the questionnaire on the CLS website, so you can go into more detail about what exactly available and questions that relate to your field. So hopefully they'll be available by the end of the year. So just to talk a little bit about the content. So first of all, one of the main features of this week was data linkage consent. So we've gone to ask the cohort members for consent, now that they're 17. And we're looking at a number of different areas that we want to link administrative data to. So mainly educational. So we've got things like the National Pupil Database, the Individualised Learner Record, and Higher Education Statistics Agency. So getting permission, if we can consent to link to that. UCAS also, and SLC, the student loans companies. And then health information, so from the National Health Service, various different things, and also linkage to economic information from the Departments of Work and Pensions, HMRC, Revenue and Customs, for example, on income, tax and benefits, and the last area is crime, Ministry of Justice. So they're the data linkage consents that we're trying to get at the moment. So in terms of content, as usual, we've used a wide range of instruments. And as those of you who are familiar will know, that as the cohort members have got older, they've been able to take a greater role in responding to the survey. At MCS 7, at the next week, the cohort members are actually responding to the majority of the questions. They'll be completing a face-to-face, a self-completion, and online questionnaire. And as usual, we'll have physical measurements, so height, weight, and body fat, as we've collected at most sweeps. And the cognitive assessment, this MCS 7, is going to be a numeracy test. The parents will participate, but they'll be completing a shorter online questionnaire. So just to give you a brief overview of the content. So the parents will complete and update sort of usual background information on things like family context, parental education, schooling and parenting, their health and their employment, income and housing situation. The other thing that they'll complete is the strengths and difficulties questionnaire on behalf of the cohort member. And interestingly, this will also be completed by the cohort member themselves, so we'll be able to get comparisons there. The cohort member will also answer questions on family and home life, and what they're up to now. So, for example, education and schooling, if they're employed, had any employment, and their income from that. And there will also be questions relating to health and physical activity, and diet and body image, other things like sexual identity, relationships, sex and pregnancy, and risky behaviours. We've also got quite a lot of psychological questions. So, for example, the Big 5 personality traits, Big 5, which we asked of parents in the last week, and I think MCS 4 or 5. We'll be asking the cohort member to complete that. So we'll have personality tests. We're also doing the self-esteem scale, which was at MCS 6 and MCS 5, and the mood and feelings questionnaire, which we've done in previous weeks. So we'll be continuing with those. So that's the kind of overview of the content.